This week, the Cohen Center for Modern Jewish Studies at Brandeis University has released new population estimates for American Jews in 2019. Some results are expected, like how over 1/5 of all American Jews live in New York alone, but other results leave a lot to unpack. So that's what we'll do. I'm Lev Gringaus, and welcome to The Jews Are Tired, your podcast about Jewish news. So, before I tell you the population estimates for American Jews in 2019, we have to back up. Because a few weeks ago, around Rosh Hashanah, I said on this podcast that there were about 5.7 million Jews in the United States. That number is one of the regular estimates ranging between 5.2 to 5.7 million from various Israeli institutions that keep track of Jewish populations worldwide, and those numbers are themselves based on American Jewish population studies from the 90s and early 2000s, so 30, 20 years ago. Here's where things get interesting and tie into some of the underlying tension of American and world Jewry today. If we listen to Israeli estimates, Israel is the country with the most Jews in the world at 6.75 million-ish Israeli Jews versus 5.7 million-ish American Jews, which starts to paint the picture that Israel is the future of world Jewry. And if you bring in that common narrative in both American and Israeli circles about intermarriage in the U.S. leading to the eventual decrease and end of the Jewish community, then you've got that big, simple story. American Jewry is dying, and Israel carries the torch now. That's a story repeated by lots of people. For Israel, it reflects a need to cement the idea of being the state that represents all Jews, which is easier when you have most of the Jews. For American Jews, it reflects a worry about the modern erosion of Jewish institutions like synagogues and day schools, as well as fears of intermarriage. But the big and simple story, as usual, may be totally wrong, because the Cohen Center for Modern Jewish Studies at Brandeis University pegs the American Jewish population in 2019 at 7.5 million Jews, almost 2 million more than the Israeli estimates. To break that down further, that's 4.4 million adults who say they are Jewish by religion, another 1.5 million adults who say they are Jewish but have no religion, and an estimated 1.6 million kids under the age of 18 being raised as Jews. At face value, this at least raises the conversation that if America has the most Jews in the world, do Israeli officials get to go around saying they represent world Jewry? Side note, yes, a number of Israeli officials have said this and continue to say it. And on a more local, America-only level, does this mean that we can do away with the doom and gloom predictions of the decline of American Jewry? Well, for the sake of the conversation, let's look deeper. Because American Jewry is disproportionately old. According to Brandeis University, 26%, or over 1/4 of American Jewish adults are 65 years old or older. That's about 1.5 million people. And without that generation, there are just 6 million Jews in the U.S., less than Israel's 6.75 million, but still pretty close. And let's say, for example, that the next generation of Jewish kids is roughly the same size as it is right now at 1.6 million. If we add that back in, American Jewry is still on top with 7.6 million Jews. So I don't know that that's necessarily the American Jewry is dying story, and it makes for some interesting conversations on the diaspora-Israel relationship. But it has to be said that I am taking some liberties right now with projecting, how many Jewish kids there might be in the next generation. It could very well be that American Jewry is peaking right now, and in another few decades, we will see the decline everyone's been worried about. Another notable factor is that the Brandeis study is looking at people who say they are Jewish, and that doesn't always go along with what traditional Jewish law says is Jewish. According to Jewish law, someone is a Jew if their mother is Jewish or if they convert to Judaism. This is a much longer conversation on who is a Jew and who gets to decide who is a Jew, but it's relevant to point out when looking at these numbers and the differences between different population estimates that might be using different definitions of who is a Jew. In a similar vein, there's no indication what 1.6 million kids being quote-unquote raised Jewish in America actually means. Are they getting a Jewish education of some kind? This study just doesn't tell us, but it's another important thing to consider. Quality and not just quantity. To wrap up this story on another contentious point, the Brandeis survey shows that 51% of American Jewish adults identify as Democrats, 29% as independents, and 17% as Republicans. Particularly since President Donald Trump said in August that Jews who vote for Democrats are, quote, very disloyal to Jewish people and very disloyal to Israel, end quote, this has been sort of a weird and sore conversation to have. So I'll let you reach your own conclusion about what those numbers should or shouldn't tell us, but I just think that it's worth reflecting on how many Jews were accused of disloyalty by a sitting U.S. president. So if you want to check out the info for yourself, which I highly recommend, just Google the Cohen Center at Brandeis University, go to their website, and under recent research publications, you should see all this info and more. All right, now let's move on to our next story, an update on Israeli politics. For the first time in 11 years, someone other than longtime Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will get a chance to form an Israeli government and potentially become Prime Minister. That someone is former Israeli Defense Forces Chief of Staff Benny Gantz, who heads Israel's largest political party, Blue and White. On Monday, which also happened to be Netanyahu's 70th birthday, Netanyahu told Israeli President Reuven Rivlin that he was unable to make a governing coalition in the 28-day limit given to him by law. Netanyahu could have asked for a 2-week extension for his efforts, but didn't do so. Israel's political system has been gridlocked for months, as neither the right-wing bloc of parties nor the center and left-wing bloc of parties has a 61 or more seat majority necessary to make a functioning government in the 120-seat Knesset, which is Israel's parliament. President Rivlin is expected to give Gantz 28 days to break the gridlock, but he has as much chance of forming a government as Netanyahu, meaning not much of a chance at all. If Gantz fails at forming a majority coalition in the Knesset, a 21-day free-for-all period will take place, where a majority of current Knesset members can nominate anyone, including Netanyahu or Gantz again, to make a government. And if that fails, then Israel will have its third round of national elections in under a year in March of 2020. The only hope of avoiding elections is if Gantz's party, Blue and White, and Netanyahu's party, the Likud, form a national unity government with over 61 Knesset seats. But negotiations between the two parties have failed at every attempt over the past few weeks. Blue and White doesn't want to join a coalition with Netanyahu, who is involved in 3 corruption cases that Israel's Attorney General is currently working through. So at this rate, no one is sure what to expect, other than more elections. The situation could change if Netanyahu is charged in the corruption cases, but even that is unclear depending on the time frame and the severity of the charges themselves. And in the meanwhile, the gridlock continues and there's a lot of pressure to get Israel's government functional again, with fresh instability in the Middle East after President Trump withdrew U.S. troops from North Syria. Israel needs to have a plan for figuring out what comes next. With no government, there's no budgeting for the country or the Israeli army, and a tougher time to organize against threats in the region or to address internal issues in Israel like poverty and the separation of religion and state, amongst the many, many things that need addressing in the country. So for now, Netanyahu, Israel's longest-serving prime minister, is still technically in that position. I can only hope to bring you some kind of update on Israeli politics, when things work, sooner rather than later, I hope. Okay, so now, for the last story of this week, I just want to mark the fact that October 27th, this upcoming Sunday, will be 1 year since the terror attack at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. That's where a far-right, white supremacist, gun-wielding terrorist decided to attack a synagogue where 3 congregations prayed because he was angry about immigration and blamed the Jews for bringing people to the United States. A number of Jewish newspapers have written and published articles to reflect on 1 year since that event, where 11 Jews were killed. It is the deadliest attack on Jews in America ever and has changed a lot about how many of us view Jewish life, status, and security in America. So, I just wanted to direct you to some of the articles that caught my eye if you have time to read them. If you visit the New York Jewish Week website, there's some powerful reporting by Shira Hanau on the Tree of Life community, and a piece that looks at the varied way the attack has been used in the political arena by left-wing and right-wing Jews. If you go to the Forward's website, the former editor-in-chief of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette wrote a piece about his decision to print the Jewish morning prayer, the Kaddish Yatom, as a headline for the paper a week after the attack. And on the Jewish Telegraphic Agency's website is some important coverage as well, particularly a piece by Ben Sales reflecting on the Jewish community in Pittsburgh. Shira Hanau, the journalist for the New York Jewish Week, who has done a large part of the Pittsburgh coverage, is also coming to Minnesota on November 13th to speak at the University of Minnesota Journalism School about her experience reporting on the event and the role of Jewish journalism. She has a unique perspective, both as an incredibly intelligent person and also because she's young at 23 years old working on this coverage. Full disclaimer, I interned at the New York Jewish Week over this past summer and know Shira personally. But regardless of my bias, she is someone worth coming to hear, both for her stories and for the opportunity to reflect on the Tree of Life attack. This has been this week's The Jews Are Tired podcast. I'm Lev Gringaus, and hopefully next week, the Jews will get some rest. The Jews Are Tired is a product of Jewfolk Inc. For more information, go to tcjewfolk.com or email the show at podcast@tcjewfolk.com.